We've been exploring the arcane laws, the so-called mysteries. Several weeks ago, it was suggested that we might look at the dynamics of black holeness, and specifically mentioning Nassim Haramein, the physicist who is also has a great spiritual bent and explains things in the way of a spiritual language that we can all understand. But in a nutshell, we know that a black hole is like a void, and around that black hole is a field which is called the event horizon. We also know that whatever enters that event horizon has no way of escape. It is then inevitable that after some dynamics come into play, that something will enter the black hole and be effectively annihilated, have all of the light squeezed out of it. Now, if we make an analogy of this with our spiritual path, we can recognize very clearly that that point when we arrived at and entered that event horizon was when we totally surrendered or committed ourselves, recognizing that the whole purpose of our life was to attain that end, whatever it appeared to be for us: enlightenment, freedom, peace. Many of us have given it different names. But if we hypothesize a little, we can perhaps realize that within that event horizon, we have to be in that state where the three levels of life have come together for us. Those three levels, so-called, being that nitty-gritty level, that I call it, where the material laws are in play. And then the aesthetic, which is the immaterial world, the world of the occult, the world of the ethereal, the play of energies of life. And then that level that's interrelated, interconnected, the level of oneness. All three come together, we know, in this event horizon for us. But then we've discussed on and on about arriving at this point of stillness. And arriving at this point of stillness, there is no doubt that you've experienced the phenomena that instead of being in motion and therefore moving into existence or life or time, that in a place of stillness, the dynamic is completely changed. Experiences, perceptions enter into us, come to us, and there we deal with them in that integrated state of Satchitananda, so-called, where those three have more or less come together for us, those three levels of existence. Now, in endeavoring to know these arcane laws, we really need to know the dynamic that is now present in our life, unseen, which is that which propels the object, the something, into the black hole itself. So the purpose of understanding and knowing the mysteries, the arcane laws, is to bring us to a point where, having recognized that there is no other purpose in our life than the attainment of whatever it is that we call it, but that which is propelling us into annihilation, non-existence, squeezing out all the light in our life. So we can begin to see, when we see these arcane laws in operation, what it is that's occurring for us. The inevitable, absolutely inevitable motion of moving out of that event horizon where we have those three levels of existence at play into the black hole, where we are clearly aware of all of the light, all of the illusions of life being squeezed out of us. There was a simple story told last week that enabled us to glean one of these important arcane laws. And there's a simple story told many years ago that also contains the kernel of this same arcane law. Let's see whether in its telling we can begin to recognize not only the law that's operational here, but bring us closer to being able to see and know, surrender to, and be blissful in the dynamic that is propelling us into annihilation. There was a king, and he was a good king, but he awoke one day with three questions that had arisen for him. What is the most important time? Who is the most important person? And what is the most important thing to do at every moment? Now he gathered all of his learned pundits together and he asked them to answer these questions for him. And there were many opinions, many differentiating viewpoints that were given as answers that were posed by the questions. But the king was not satisfied with any of them. But he had heard of an old hermit that lived high in the mountains nearby in his kingdom. So he decided that he would go and confer with him, because he was said to be enlightened and all-knowing. But he also knew that this hermit did not abide the pretentious, the pompous, the rich and famous who were just seeking knowledge. So the king dressed himself in the garb of a peasant, and even though he took a little bevy of servants with him, attendants, when he came to the foot of the mountain, he left his attendants there and made the climb up the mountain to the abode of the hermit. Now when he arrived at the plateau where the hermit lived, there was the old man hoeing a piece of land, obviously for cultivations. But the king noticed that every time he used his hoe, because of his age, he had to take a deep sigh. He was obviously very old, and the effort was very great for him. But the king, as he was watching the old hermit hoe, posed his 3 questions to him. What is the most important? Who is the most important person? And what is the most important thing to do at all times? Well, the old hermit just smiled at him and indicated to him to sit by, make himself comfortable. And this the king did. But after watching the old man for some time, the king felt himself a great compassion for the old man, so he offered to take over the hoe for him. And the old hermit very gratefully allowed him to do so. So the king got to hoeing the ground, and he was sweating, as one does with his effort, while the old man sat by and rested. But then, after a while, the rows had been hoed, and the king stood up and said, well, now will you answer my questions? And the old hermit said, you've done a good job now. Let me take over from you. You go aside and rest now. And the king said, well, if you can't answer my questions, I'll just leave. The old hermit said to the king, do you hear a sound? And they looked around to see a man coming out of the bushes, clutching his stomach, where he had blood pouring forth, a great gaping wound. The man staggered over to the king and fell at his feet unconscious. The king quickly took off his shirt to stem the flow of blood, and when it became saturated with blood, he rinsed it and put it again over the wound until the bleeding ceased. Now, with the help of the old hermit, they carried the man into the hermit's hut and laid him on a pallet. And by now he was unconscious, and the evening had fallen. Well, after tending the man's wound some more, the king was absolutely and totally fatigued. So he leant against the doorway, and he immediately went to sleep. Now, when he woke up, the dawn was rising, and when he looked over, the man lying on his pallet was also roused, looking around, wondering where he was and what was happening. The king came and bent over him, and as the man looked up at the king's face, he said, "I'm so sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry." The king said, "What are you sorry for?" The man said, "Your Highness, I am your avowed enemy. I heard that you were coming to visit this old sage, so I decided that I would take this opportunity to take revenge on you, because you killed my brother on the battlefield, and you confiscated all our belongings, so that our family had no means to make our life. But now you've saved my life, and I'm indebted to you. I now vow that I will give you my life and the life of my family as slaves for the rest of our lives. The king very quickly countermanded this by saying, no, 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 there is not necessity. He said, let me return all of your goods and land to you. And with that, he helped the ailing man down to the bottom of the mountain where his attendants awaited, and he gave the order that his attendants guide him and help him back to his home. But then the king returned up the mountain because his questions had not been answered. When he arrived again at the house of the hermit and confronted him, he said, will you answer my questions now? What is the most important? Who is the most important person? And what is the most important thing to do at all times? The hermit smiled, looked at him and said, have not your questions been answered? And then he proceeded to enumerate what those answers were in the context of the events of the several days prior. This story is left unfinished because it leaves the opportunity to ask you. From the events of experiences of the king in his encounter with the hermit, how were these three questions answered? What is the most important time? Who is the most important person? And what is the most important thing to do at all times? In answering, we have the possibility of knowing the arcane lore that's been hidden in the stories of the last several gatherings. As you can know, it automatically brings together for us stillness, presence, nowness, and movement. Knowing that the response arises out of the meeting of these two. What is the answer to this question? is the most important time? Who is the most important person? Who is the most important person? Who are you in relationship to all of these people?
I am. The I am.
And what is the most important thing to do? All the time. What is the law that's operational in your life now, in relationship to life? When someone comes in your face,
Be present.
yes, that's the first two questions.
Whatever needs to be done.
Whatever needs to be done. Whatever needs to be done. Whatever response comes up out of that meeting of stillness and inward movement of life. But there remains the question, what is this arcane law then that leads us to recognize the dynamic that takes us out of that event horizon where these laws are unified into the heart of the black hole, where annihilation takes place, the squeezing out of the light, which is the illusion of all of existence. What's present in your life now that's overriding this stillness and movement that is ever present with you now? What transcends life and life's movement for you now?
Is it the returning into oneness?
Oneness, we know. Oneness. Beyond oneness. See, now, it becomes very clear for us because it's in every encounter, every moment when that stillness and that presence and life meets. It's there. Not just the response that arises in relationship to that interaction. That's the dynamic of life. But now there is some overriding force, so-called, in your life that's present, that's clearly discernible. What is it? How do you stand?
For me, what is clear, I don't know if it's the same thing, but what is clear now is I can go with nothing. I would say the knowing, the trust that whatever happens,
Okay,
it's here.
okay, okay.
It's the story you said that I listened to during holidays about going, the three men going on the boat,
Yes.
and this one is going with nothing, and just being there, being here,
Yes.
carrying an energy, something really.
Put it in your own words.
Seems that when we hit that outer ring, what was that called again?
Ventura.
Yeah. And ultimately, the annihilation of rebirth is inevitable. That into that space comes grace from beyond anything
Okay,
and everything.
okay. What is it that's propelling you into that black hole?
Truth.
All right? Give it a word, give it a word. Surrender? Yes?
Love.
Right? So what's there? In every enactment that arises out of the meeting of being still and the movement of life moving into us. Yes, this.
Reaction.
Yes. Right. Hold on to that for now. Hold on to it for now. See it. Overriding. Being present. There. In every single event of our life. And there. We've got it. We've got the propulsion. We've got that movement, that force that takes us into the black hole of annihilation. See for yourself. Experience it for yourself. Come to know it. And rejoice in it. It overcomes all the fears that we might ever have of dying, losing ourselves. See what